Thanks for jumping on to this conversation. As we get started, we're going to give folks a few more moments to jump on, as always. And as we do so, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat box. As always, Coalition webinars bring together a wonderful group of friends, members, associates, connections with the Coalition. And it's the relationships that we're able to build, the work and power that we're able to do together that always gives us the biggest impact in the world. So please take advantage of the chat box right now, introduce yourself, let folks know where you are coming from today, what you're thinking about as you're thinking about the climate crisis. And we can start to add you into the conversation along the way. As always, one of our goals, we hope, is that you find new people to do your work with going forward. Yes, and as Camilla is putting in the chat box, today we'll have translation. So everybody who is on, if you would look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that looks like a little globe with a lot of lines on it. Click on that and select your preferred language, either English or Spanish. All right. All right. We'll give folks just a few more minutes. Alejandro and Mark, thanks for introducing yourselves. Shiori, good to see you again. We'll give everybody just one more moment. All right. What a good group of people we've got today. From Ecuador, from New Orleans, from Connecticut, all over. Fort Monroe, great stuff. What a good group of people. All right, let's see. A couple more folks trickling in here. I'm gonna give them just a moment to get on. Okay, so we're gonna get started, I think. And welcome, everybody. My name's Braden Paynter. I'm the Director of Methodology and Practice at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. And if this is your first time meeting the Coalition, we are a network of museums, historic sites, parks, places of memory initiatives around the world. More than 300 members in more than 65 countries. And what brings everybody together is a belief that our historic sites have a powerful role to play in helping us build more just and humane futures. Additionally, everybody, I think, also comes to the Coalition because we believe we do this work better when we are connected with each other. To that end, for folks who are just joining, you'll see that there are folks introducing themselves in the chat box. Please continue to do so if you're just coming in, get a chance to know who else is here, say hi to others, greet folks that you already know, make new friends. At the same time, we're also using translation today, so please, at the bottom of the screen, where there's the little globe with the lines on it, select the language that you would like to primarily listen in. We have brought together 3 great speakers today. Not all of them ended up being public historians, but as the way the conversation unfolded, we're pretty excited to have this group of people, right? As all of us look around the world and we are facing a global experience of a changing climate that is going to be impacting the people and the planet and all of the creatures that live on it in so many different ways. This is a global conversation for sure. And it's also something that is not just a science conversation. It is a humanities conversation. It's a cultural conversation. It's a human rights conversation. It's a field-wide conversation. It's an individual conversation. Anything this big and this complex is going to have multiple facets. And as always, when we try and take on big, complex ideas and challenges, the more people we can have working from different directions, the stronger we're going to be as we try and take it on, right? The more solutions, the more options, the more wisdom we're going to be able to assemble. So what we've done today is we've pulled 3 folks who are thinking about this work from really different angles. We'll hear from Danielle Rebolledo at Via Grimaldi about some of their work, starting with human rights. So Danielle Rebolledo is going to give us some perspective on moving from the way that they're incorporating environmental justice into the human rights work that they're doing. Jen Kretzer is going to talk a little bit about an amazing science center that that has been thinking really deeply about the cultural work that they do. And Sarah Sutton is thinking at the field-wide level about how we can be thinking and measuring and moving and acting as a whole field. So a really wide group of people that we've got to bring together to do this. All right. And so with that, Danielle, would you please go ahead and get us started? So Danielle, are you still there? Did we lose the connection?
Disculpa, Braden, empiezo yo, ¿no?
Go ahead, Danielle.
Sorry, I don't have translation at this time.
Oh, we've lost the translation.
No problem.
There it is.
Buenos días a todas y todos. Me gustaría presentarles brevemente la institución en la cual trabajo, el Parque por la Paz Villa Grimaldi. Durante la dictadura cívico-militar en Chile fue un centro de secuestro, tortura y exterminio, conocido como Cuartel Terranova. Por acá pasaron alrededor de 4.500 personas por razones políticas, 241 de las cuales son actualmente detenidos, desaparecidos, ejecutados políticos. El sitio fue demolido, recuperado después por la ciudadanía y como sitio de memoria y después resignificado como un parque por la paz. Bueno, como sitio de conciencia, nuestro principal trabajo se relaciona con la educación y la promoción en derechos humanos a través de la puesta en valor de la memoria histórica del sitio. Sin embargo, tenemos toda la convicción de que uno de los principales valores y potencialidades que tenemos es permitir abrir espacio en la actualidad para considerar con las nuevas generaciones, abrir esta perspectiva histórica y abrir un diálogo público acerca de las problemáticas contemporáneas en materia de derechos humanos, promoviendo así una cultura de los derechos humanos, valorando la democracia y el ejercicio de una ciudadanía activa, crítica e inclusiva. El pequeño proyecto al cual me referiré hoy surge luego del estallido social en Chile del 2019, donde ocurre una movilización ciudadana sin precedentes para manifestarse en torno al modelo económico y político, en la búsqueda de una mayor justicia social. Y en donde los conflictos ambientales fueron una de las demandas históricas que aparecieron. En este contexto, durante el año 2020 y 2021, realizamos un proyecto llamado Sitios de Conciencia y Territorios Vulnerados, el derecho humano a vivir en un medio ambiente sano, el cual consideró visitar 3 localidades asociadas a tipos de degradación ambiental por causas antrópicas. Una de ellas fue Petorca, relacionada con la escasez hídrica por el monocultivo de paltos, Puchuncaví, relacionado con la contaminación atmosférica por la producción, bueno, por la industria, y Neltume, que es una localidad en el sur de Chile relacionada con la reivindicación de la etnia mapuche por los territorios ancestrales y la depredación que está ocurriendo actualmente en los bosques por la industria forestal, inmobiliaria y turística principalmente. Este trabajo lo llevamos también en colaboración con otros sitios de memoria locales como Melinca Puchuncaví, el Centro Cultural Museo y Memoria Neltume. El objetivo de este proyecto fue concientizar sobre el derecho humano a un medio ambiente sano, abordando estos graves conflictos socioambientales. En términos metodológicos hicimos un acercamiento multidisciplinar con un énfasis etnográfico en la búsqueda de conocer y otorgar un rostro a las víctimas de degradación ambiental, con el fin de así empatizar y propiciar una discusión pública y crítica acerca de las situaciones que están viviendo. A través del trabajo campo se realizaron alrededor de 20 entrevistas a modo de historia de vida de los habitantes de los territorios, recuperando también fotografías y otros documentos. Hablaré brevemente de la realidad de estos lugares. En Petorca, una de las principales actividades que históricamente se realizaban es la agricultura y la minería artesanal, la agricultura tradicional y de subsistencia. Sin embargo, en la década de los 90 empieza a cambiar significativamente el paisaje con la introducción de monocultivos de paltos. Un fruto tropical que para su fructificación y por kilo se necesitan alrededor de 500.000 litros de agua. Esto, bueno, la rentabilidad del fruto generó un aumento exponencial del área destinada a cultivo, con una agroindustria que empieza a captar agua del suelo, del subsuelo a través de pozos, desvíos de cursos de agua, del cauce de los ríos, en su mayoría ilegalmente, y esto, bueno, sumado a amplios periodos de sequía, llevó a la desaparición de las aguas superficiales que estaban destinadas para el consumo humano, de animales y de riego para los pequeños campesinos, y con eso los habitantes de las comunidades se ven forzados, digamos, a cambiar su realidad, y actualmente reciben agua a través de camiones de aljibes en una muy pequeña cantidad que le alcanza para subsistir en muy precarias condiciones, transformando completamente su vida. Yo, dentro de la presentación, quise mostrar, digamos, algunas de las historias que pudimos relevar y empezamos a conocer en los territorios. Bueno, Soy la Quiroga, una pequeña agricultora, y nos cuenta, digamos, con su relato, esos recuerdos de infancia que tenían de vivir en ese lugar cuando había agua, cuando había un río que les proporcionaba, digamos, otras formas de poder subsistir, y bueno, cómo era, digamos, la vida familiar y la vida de la comunidad en torno, digamos, a esa condición diferente que tenían cuando había agua. También hay una cita de Carlos Alvarado, que también es un agricultor, un pequeño agricultor. Él ya tiene más de 80 y tantos años, y recuerdo que él decía de que nunca había ido al médico por ninguna afección, era muy sano, y después a sus 80 y tantos años empezó a dejar de dormir bien, a tener preocupaciones, y bueno, él le diagnostican depresión. Tenía depresión porque ya no tenía agua, digamos, para poder regar sus cultivos, y se estaba viendo cómo estaba forzado, digamos, a cambiar sus condiciones de vida y no tenía forma de subsistir. Esas son una de las ejemplos como de las realidades que se viven en estos territorios. Por otro lado, fuimos a Puchuncaví, que es una zona de sacrificio que está relacionada con una alta contaminación atmosférica del agua y la tierra por un grupo de unas 15 empresas que están emplazadas en el borde costero, que es un núcleo industrial. Los orígenes de este conflicto socioambiental comienzan a mediados del siglo pasado, donde hay un proceso de industrialización sin precedentes, y se empiezan a instalar las primeras empresas. Luego, con la dictadura cívico-militar y en democracia, con la consolidación del modelo neoliberal, el crecimiento del complejo no se detuvo, y bueno, como les comentaba, hoy día hay más de 15 empresas, entre ellas 4 centrales termoeléctricas a carbón, una refinería y fundición de cobre, almacenamiento de combustible y gases y productos químicos peligrosos. Esto ha provocado el escenario de contaminación, una visión de muerte de las comunidades, donde sus habitantes se enfrentan diariamente a episodios de intoxicaciones masivas, principalmente en niños, el incremento de enfermedades respiratorias, de cáncer, problemas cognitivos, de aprendizaje, y esto convive extrañamente con el turismo en el periodo estival, porque esto es una playa, es un lugar costero donde llegan turistas y, bueno, desconocen la realidad y los miedos de quienes habitan estos territorios, tienen que enfrentarse todos los días, digamos, a esta situación. Les presento 2 historias también de personas que conocimos en el terreno. Don Carlos Vega, que él es buzo mariscador, y bueno, aparte de tener toda esta visión de cómo cambia el paisaje, tenía una visión súper interesante de cómo cambia el paisaje marino, de lo que ellos recolectaban, digamos, anteriores años, y cómo se ha ido cambiando con el tiempo. Y bueno, también tiene una visión interesante acerca de esta responsabilidad de las generaciones anteriores, de qué le van a otorgar a las nuevas generaciones, digamos, como herencia, a su hijo, a sus nietos. Es una visión bastante compleja, que le estarán entregando, digamos, ellos con este grado de contaminación que tienen en la localidad. Y bueno, por otro lado también agregué una historia de Mercedes. Ella es profesora, su colegio cierra, digamos, por la contaminación, y bueno, también tenía una visión bastante romántica de lo que era vivir en ese territorio cuando se daba la agricultura, cuando se daba la ganadería, y ahora es que está todo desierto, digamos, por el tema de la contaminación. Por último, visitamos Neltume, que se relaciona con las reivindicaciones históricas del pueblo mapuche por los territorios ancestrales, las cuales son parte esencial como de su cosmovisión y su cosmogonía. Ellos conciben, digamos, una existencia relacional en armonía con la naturaleza. Lo anterior considera compartir el territorio con respeto y cuidado, alejándose de estas lógicas de producción o explotación que impone el modelo actual. Esta visión que ellos tienen y la carencia a lo mejor de una política pública con una perspectiva intercultural ha provocado que históricamente se hayan criminalizado y bueno, y no se reconocen sus derechos ancestrales y prácticas culturales, considerándolos en la lectura de algunos, digamos, abogados de derecho indígena como enemigos para el Estado y siendo juzgados desde una visión etnocentrista y occidental. Lo anterior se suma en su territorio a la instalación de centrales hidroeléctricas, de la industria forestal, de inmobiliarias, de turismo. Aquí también traté de incluir algunas imágenes de personas que conocimos, Olga Barrera y su hija. Ellas viven en una comunidad étnica mapuche que está muy cercana al lugar donde nosotros visitábamos y nos hablaban de toda esta idea de la disputa que tienen con los territorios y esta relación, digamos, que tienen con la gente que empieza a instalarse con la industria forestal, con la industria de turismo e inmobiliaria, que están en una lucha constante, digamos, y un tema bastante complejo porque se han hecho parte de lugares que tenían cementerios indígenas, que tenían otras condiciones para llevar a cabo sus prácticas culturales y ahora no lo pueden hacer. Y bueno, y por otro lado está Mario Sandoval, que él vive, digamos, en carne propia el proceso de privatización de algunos lugares que antes eran comunes. Y bueno, él se ve forzado en algún momento en una localidad donde existían todos los servicios, escuelas, canchas, lugares de esparcimiento, irse por la privatización de esos lugares y bueno, desarma su casa de madera y la dejan a un costado de la carretera y tiene que ser forzado, digamos, a ir a vivir a otro lugar. Bueno, como producto acerca de este proyecto, brevemente me referiré. A través del trabajo en terreno y de la historia de vidas recuperadas, confeccionamos una exposición itinerante que pudo visitar cada localidad y se escribió una obra de etnoteatro, que fue un ejercicio de co-creación entre las comunidades, las actrices y nuestro equipo. Esta obra de etnoteatro se basó en la experiencia y los relatos recuperados de vivir en estos territorios vulnerados y se publicó un libro que reflexiona acerca de la relación entre derecho humano y medio ambiente, las políticas públicas, y parte importante del libro también presentar las historias de vida de los habitantes recuperados a lo largo del proyecto. Las actividades fueron bastante bien recibidas, en especial la obra de etnoteatro, porque los asistentes se sintieron ampliamente identificados y representados con las vivencias que estaban, digamos, presentándose en la obra y lo que permitió un diálogo bastante enriquecedor e intergeneracional. En la presentación en el TUME, que corresponde a esta primera fotografía, por ejemplo, teníamos asistentes de la etnia mapuche, habían habitantes del pueblo, como fue en un fin de semana, habían también turistas que habían ido, digamos, por el día, habían autoridades locales, incluso había una persona que estaba participando como redactor de la nueva constitución, que estaba en la semana de terreno, y que pudo también participar de la discusión posterior que se dio. También se hicieron otras acciones de difusión y sensibilización a través de talleres y presentaciones se reflexiona acerca de los conflictos socioambientales, desde la perspectiva étnica, desde la legislación y las políticas públicas en el marco del proceso constituyente, y bueno, algunas otras más prácticas como talleres de huertos urbanos que pudimos hacer con las comunidades aledañas a nuestro sitio de memoria. Se presentaron, se participó en entrevistas de la prensa escrita, radiales, y bueno, también con el fin de documentar esta experiencia, se escribieron artículos académicos acerca de la metodología y los resultados. Como reflexiones generales, fue interesante el presentar el derecho humano al medio ambiente sano, ya que generalmente las comunidades no lo concibían así, entendiendo que es un deber del Estado garantizarlo y que está relacionado con muchos otros derechos conexos, como el derecho al agua, a la salud, al ocio. Además fue una interesante instancia para discutir acerca de las políticas públicas y su relación con las comunidades, sus problemáticas, y la necesidad también de un abordaje intercultural. Fue también una oportunidad de reflexionar en torno al complejo proceso constituyente que se ha llevado en curso, en la búsqueda de una mayor justicia social y la necesidad de llevar procesos participativos en los procesos ciudadanos. tanto en la planificación como el desarrollo y la fiscalización de las políticas públicas. Bueno, creo que lo demás lo podemos dejar para la conversación y creo que me extendí un poco. Sí, disculpen si me extendí algunos minutos más. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And it's on us for not giving you the 2 hours that you need to fully explain the depth of the project that you were working on there. It's just such great stuff. There's always other kind of facets and dimensions to it that are really, really thoughtful. But thanks for getting us at least started with it. Jen, would you pick up from there and talk a little bit about your work?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Kretzer, and I am the Director of Climate Initiatives at the Wild Center, which is a site in northern New York State. We're part of a large park called the Adirondack Park, and we are also on a formal current and contemporary and traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee people. So the Adirondack Park is a huge 6 million acre 2.2 million hectare park in northern New York State, and we're a science center located pretty much right in the middle of this park, which is a patchwork of public and private land. So there's people living inside the park. Our museum has been around for about 15 years. We see roughly 100,000 people a year coming to our site. And our focus and mission is to connect people and nature and show ways in which people and nature can thrive together, using the Adirondack Park as a lens. I'm going to talk specifically today about how our site is addressing climate change and climate impacts in our region, and in one instance, globally. So I'm going to just move right into that. One of the things that we really wanted to think about in our intersection with our communities is how museums serve as a third place. So in our lives, we all have different places that are important to us. Usually our home is the first place that is held into our heart. Our second place might be our work, but oftentimes there are other places within our communities that can really be places of meaning, places of memory, places of importance and relevance. And the Wild Center really wanted to position ourselves as a place in this small rural region where people could explore and connect, not just with science, but also with the culture and stories of our communities. We really wanted to shift away from being in a transactional and authoritative relationship with our community and think about how we wanted to move and be in relationship and in conversation and dialogue with our community. I think the best example of that at our institution are our programs that are focused on climate change. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. So we have a number of different programs that we do. The first one I wanted to mention is our Youth Climate Program. This program started in 2009, where we started convening and engaging young people on the issue of climate change, science, impacts, and solutions. We do that through youth climate summits, and that's a 1 to 3 day event that brings together high school age students, so between the ages of 14 and 18, to learn about climate change and then create action plans to take back to their schools and communities. We've been doing this now for about 14 years, and we've expanded our program and reach to 23 states and 8 countries. So we actually have quite a lot of resources and materials on our website to help other places around the world work with young people on the climate crisis. From that program, that really inspired us to take on other ways to convene audiences around climate change. So some of the other examples of that we've done here at the Wild Center are working with local contractors, builders, architects, planners, community developers, to look at what climate resilience and building a greener Adirondacks might look like. So what are the materials necessary? What is the education necessary? What are the ways in which we can create more climate resilient community? So another case study is looking at how we can convene our leaders around the region after a climate disaster has struck. So back in 2011, we had a huge hurricane that came through, Hurricane Irene, that destroyed many of our roads, our infrastructure. It took out emergency response centers and really was, I think, for our area, a wake-up call on the on climate change and the impacts that we can suffer in our region. So the museum opened our doors and brought together the decision makers and community leaders and to talk about what these issues meant to them, to also be a place where they could share their personal stories and to take on creating action plans in their communities to respond to the growing threat of climate change. So that was another example of how we've been working on this. A third example is a program that we did called Wintergreen. The region where I live in where the Wild Center is located is heavily dependent on winter tourism, to build our economy. We are deeply enmeshed in winter culture. So we know that with the climate modeling and actually what we've already seen happen in terms of the impacts is again going to be really and has been really impacted by climate change. Our winters are roughly 7 to 10 degrees warmer than they were 30 years ago, and we're continuing to see that trend. So we brought together, again, the leaders, community decision makers, and the people that would be most impacted by these shifts in climate to talk about and highlight personal stories, the impacts of climate change, and to start thinking about solutions, like what will happen when we no longer have snowpack for 8 months of the year. What will that do to our industry? What will that do to our small communities? So those are other conversations that we've convened. All of this has led to us making the decision as an institution to create and open a climate solutions exhibition, which literally just opened last week. So we're still learning a lot about it. We actually earlier this year brought in the Sites of Conscience to help our staff think about how to be in dialogue around climate change. And we've undergone some pretty extensive staff training in that space and how we could create conversations with people and with our community to elevate their own personal stories around climate change. So our new Climate Solutions exhibition really focuses on highlighting those stories and elevating the work that's already been done in the community around climate change, and to invite people to find their place in the climate movement. So some of the project components of this, we have a 3,000 square foot exhibit space. We created a makerspace and tinkering studio to develop a problem-solving mindset. We're integrating the theme of climate change solutions throughout our campus, connecting the green infrastructure of our site to climate solutions, to utilize the spherical display system that you see that's from NOAA to help people visualize impacts on a global scale as well as local, to introduce more films and opportunities to learn about climate science in our theater. And as I mentioned, the extensive staff training. We're also doing things like we've launched a community composting initiative. We're looking at how we can continue to integrate the arts, and I'll go into that in just a little bit. But as I mentioned, we really utilized the storytelling approach to how we wanted to connect and make meaning with our visitors on climate change. We really wanted to reach as many visitors as possible and inspire them to take action and participate in climate solutions. And we were also really following our own internal, I guess, brand or kind of guidelines around not being a you should organization. So in that respect, we didn't want to shame people, and we didn't want to create a feeling of like we were telling them what to do, but we wanted to sort of build the blueprint for them to take on action themselves and help them to feel empowered and find their own agency in recognizing climate solutions in their own communities and finding their voice in the movement. So as part of our new exhibition,
you wanted me to tell you when you would.
Okay, great. I'm almost done. Thank you. As part of our new exhibition, we highlighted stories of 12 people from around the region. Those stories they elevate both some of our Indigenous and BIPOC leaders, as well as youth, educators, farmers, engineers. So we really tried to move through all of those stories to help elevate those voices. And these are just some images from our exhibit opening, which just happened. And these are the themes that we're addressing within the exhibit. Finally, two new pieces for us are the integration of the arts and creating dialogue using the arts. This mural was created by Mohawk artist David Fadden, and it's an invitation for people to contribute and paint into the mural. And this will be hanging in our new exhibition. And yesterday, actually, we hosted a dance exhibition where a group of about 25 young people participated in a response to our New Solutions exhibition through interpretive dance. So that also happened in a site-specific way. So I'm going to stop sharing. I apologize for going over time, but we're really working as an institution to help build those connections and relationships with the community and bring together artists, designers across everyone, across all sectors to work on solutions. Thank you.
Thank you as always. And you get great books with lots of things to say, and right, we could go on and on forever. So hopefully this is, as always, a launching pad. We are going to have a little bit of time to chat at the end. So for everybody out there who hasn't been a speaker today, we'd love if you were thinking about two things now. One is questions that you have for folks. And the other is if there are links or other pieces of information that you would want to share in the chat for us all to learn from. So be thinking about both of those as you listen to Sarah give us one more lens on all of this.
So I have a different pathway to this. I'm not in an institution, not a museum. I don't have a site. I have a nonprofit that organizes cultural environmental action among cultural institutions in the United States. My goal is to help all of them find easier ways to do their jobs. But why is it that we do this work? So, sorry. I don't know why it hasn't come through. Are you seeing it as a regular? Oh yeah, sorry, looking at the wrong screen. My apologies. So I believe that museums can and should do this work, and that is actually a should, in my case, for institutions, because I think they're charitable and educational institutions with a community-minded approach that have buildings and exhibits, practices that affect the climate and that are affected by the climate. There's no getting away from it as our institutions. Now, in the United States, there are a lot of us, a lot of museums, zoos, gardens, and historic sites. And so many people visit them in a year that this is our opportunity as trusted resources to convey messages that help people understand the world around them and the choices they'll make. Now, increasingly, the cultural sector in the US has taken on broader responsibilities towards the community and on social justice and issues of importance to them, and environment and climate fits right into that. We also know that a big portion of those who visit museums are aware of climate change, And that awareness and sometimes lack of agency or ability to create change creates anxiety in them. And I believe that we have a capacity to help people deal with those issues of moral injury, of anticipation of loss, in ways that help them turn that into productive responses, action that can actually change the climate and change their own mental health. And we know that this is what our publics expect us to do, to give them ideas on what they can do to solve this problem. Of course, museums already have all the components in place to do the work. All of the staff and their jobs align with sustainability work, whether it's reducing impacts or creating change. And we know that they're looking for us to show them ways that they can take action, do something different, and that museums are an excellent place for doing that. Because in a museum space, we know for ourselves, but also for our visitors, it's an opportunity to think differently, to have new ideas and new feelings, new emotions introduced to ourselves that open a little window of time, of opportunity to think differently and try something new. And that's what all of this work requires, each of us to think differently and try something new, because what we've been doing hasn't helped the planet. We need a new path if we're going to create any change. But it also, climate change affects our physical collections and our buildings. And as stewards of these cultural collections, thinking about the ways in which we're going to care for them as much as we can into the future is part of our responsibility. And now I have to admit, I added the next 3 slides during the presentations earlier, because I realized that I'd forgotten to offer this to you. So I'm trained as a history professional, and then have recently broadened my work to the full cultural sector in order to do climate action. But my love is historical collections. And in the fall of this year, there will be a new book out on the arts and humanities on broadening engagement on climate change. And the focus is on what I call climate proxies. So the evidence in our collections of a changed climate. And I'm sure you can all find pictures of conditions before climate started to change that you can compare to today. That would be a climate proxy. Since we can't measure climate directly, we have to have substitute measurements that illustrate change. That's a proxy. And a proxy is a photograph from 1960 of the Mendenhall Glacier and one from 2020, where we acknowledge its loss. I'll give you 2 more examples of proxies. The reason this is important to me is that I believe that the Anthropocene, the period that humans have affected the climate, is not just for scientists. And as long as we only talk about it in a scientific approach, we leave out the communities, the individuals, the populations that don't want to engage with the science, but they might want to engage with photography, history, paintings, those sorts of things that give us a record of change over time. And one of the most fun examples I've discovered is the history of betting on ice out, whether it's Lake Placid, New York, or it's the rivers in Alaska, where people would bet on when the ice would go out in the spring because the temperatures were warming. And we can measure the difference in the change over time of how much earlier the breakup is now as a result of climate change. But now I'll go back to the regularly scheduled talk and say that one of the other reasons this is so important to me is that climate threatens our cultural heritage, as you've seen in examples just now, in all sorts of ways. And repairing that heritage and engaging in the cooperative work to do it psychologically builds strength and resilience that our people need in so many different ways. Cooperative action can turn that devastated fish pond on Oahu into a living, viable, sustainable food source for the local community if we all work on restoring something that has been damaged and neglected. Now, how did I go to doing this work when I was a grant writer as a historian and just trying to raise enough money to feed myself and support my museums? Well, in 2017, President Trump announced his intention to step out of the Paris Agreement and to remove the United States from the global contract to limit global warming. That was a personal and moral affront to me, and it required some sort of response. I didn't quite know what that would be, but it seemed to me that those of us who cared about this work would still do it. And so we started gathering. And the short version of that is between 2017 and 2018. The cultural institutions that I could get together joined something called We Are Still In, which was a coalition of states, cities, industries, investors, higher education, faith groups, health groups, and cultural institutions, to say that even if the government wouldn't do this, we would do this. We worked until 2020 when President Biden was elected. And at that point, we went from being, we are still in the Paris Agreement, to America is all in the Paris Agreement, because the president restored us to the agreement. And he did so using a piece of language that's very important to me, because we all in the coalition set this as our goal, that the goal would be 50 to 52% of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And that the goal was created by all the people you see on that list, including cultural institutions. And it's what he made as a commitment. That language specifically comes from us. And that has meant that we could move forward with much more speed on what we wanted to accomplish. So Environment and Culture Partners was able to move forward, not just because of government energy, but because of that coalition of folks working together to change the culture in the United States. And Environment and Culture Partners, which is now the nonprofit I run, has been participating in 4 really important, I feel like, important programs, because they filled a little gap in museum work by helping institutions address their greenhouse gas emissions. I want so much to do the public programming to raise general public awareness, but I'm also in a crashing hurry to reduce the things that drive climate change. So Stitch is a carbon calculator for cultural heritage, free for anyone to use for the material, so that you can look at impacts of the materials you use in collections care. We're doing a federally funded energy assessment of the impacts of museums' energy use at museums in order to create an energy footprint for the sector, and then start reducing it as part of that 50 to 52% reduction. We're finding lots of good data. We'll share that at the end of this year. Environment and Culture Partners, geez Louise, we get to help give away $5 million a year to cultural institutions who are doing energy efficiency and clean energy projects. And this Frankenthaler Climate Initiative and our role in it came out of the We Are Still In, America is All In coalition. And we've recently created something called a carbon neutral visiting initiative. Remember, my job at Environment and Culture Partners is to help more museums move forward faster. And many of those who are doing the greenhouse gas emissions assessments find that when they've done all the building work, they have to figure out how to reduce the emissions of all the people, the tourists who come and the visitors who come. So we've launched a carbon offset program designed to connect a museum's mission with an offset that makes sense to their mission in order to cover those reductions as best we can. And the first participant is the Children's Museum in Massachusetts. It's called Discovery Museum. And what's important to understand is they've offset their own energy and nonprofits in the community by building this whopper of a solar array for their parking lot. And they sell the extra energy they're generating at a discount to social service nonprofits in the community. So I want to wrap up by saying, in the absence of federal leadership, we had a moment with President Biden putting us back into the Paris Agreement. We had about a year and a half of momentum. And just in the last 2 weeks, we've seen it come not to a crashing halt, but definitely shifted away from the federal leadership back to America is all in, and the people who are in the private sector, the civic sector. And so that's why people like Jen and I show up at the U.S. Climate Action Center at the global conference, climate conference in Glasgow last year, where we talk about all of these projects that we're doing. We show that the United States, even if leadership isn't doing this work, the public is doing this work, and the public is behind it. And I can tell you, on the days when I feel like I've made a mistake, well, I don't ever feel like I've made a mistake, but I feel like I'm shouting into the wind. And I'm sure you've all felt that as well. It's the coalition members, like this coalition, like America is all in, that makes the difference and keeps you doing the hard work. And it means we get a chance to speak to people who, like Gina McCarthy is an agency head for domestic climate action that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise if I weren't part of the coalition. So what we've seen is me go from being sort of the bandit trying to get the work done as an individual to joining this larger coalition and bringing others along with me and surrounding myself with others who do good work like this so that we can scale the action to do more faster. I know you've learned it all in your own work, but if you ever forget it, don't forget. Don't let yourself work at it just alone. Call on others and do what we can to help each other keep making more progress. And when someone asks me what my definition of sustainability is, this is it: a world where everyone and everything can thrive. And they usually think that I'd give a much more complicated answer, but it's not any more complicated than that. So thank you. Thank you for doing all of the work that you're doing, and thank you for having me here.
All right. Thanks, Sarah, for giving us a very different kind of pulling up out of individual sites and thinking broadly across there, and also some great opportunities for people to be involved as we go along. All right, we've got a few minutes for us to all chat and no slides for this portion. So as we do so, use the chat box, ask questions, share links and resources that you think are really helpful, matter to you, and you would want everybody else here to know about. And maybe while people are doing that, as folks are starting to add things in, I would turn first to our three presenters and ask you all if you have, what stood out to you, what was something that you heard in somebody else's presentation that you are going to be continuing to think about or want to incorporate into your work in some way, or that you have a question about. Yeah. I'm putting you all on the spot. Yes, Sarah.
Oh, mine is still on. Anyway, thinking about sites of loss. I do a lot of work about thinking about climate hope, or at least a lot of brain space about thinking about climate hope. And being able to pair climate hope with sites of climate loss, loss of a glacier, loss of a forest, loss of a species is going to become increasingly important. We need to memorialize and recognize and shift to hope in the way we saw in the first presentation. But we don't necessarily articulate that pathway as an opportunity for institutions as broadly as we should. I think, at least not in what I've been exposed to.
Jen or Danielle, ways that you're thinking. I heard about loss in both of yours. Yeah.
I can jump in just for a moment. I also was thinking about that, Sarah, and just, you know, how to, and just to build on what you said, also the loss of people. Like, to me, that's one of the most striking things with the climate crisis, but just sort of in overall, like acknowledging that and finding a way to move forward, because the loss of people within the climate crisis is already huge, and it's just going to get bigger. And how do we find ways to sort of to grieve, and then to keep in building, and then build our own personal resilience to move forward, like together, collectively. So that's something that I have been thinking about a lot. And I think Daniel's presentation in particular made me think more and deeply from that perspective. And I really appreciated your learning about your site, Danielle, and the work that you're doing.
Sí, muchas gracias por la experiencia. Yo creo que una de las cosas que me quedan a mí es cómo poder conectar con otros sitios. Sabemos de que la crisis climática es algo global, es un problema global que nos afecta, digamos, a todos los países, y cómo eventualmente podemos levantar a través de nuestros espacios, nuestros lugares, una discusión pública para movilizar las políticas públicas y la institucionalidad y que se haga cargo, digamos, de estas problemáticas. Por lo menos, personalmente, yo estoy muy esperanzado en el proceso constituyente que se está llevando acá en Chile, que ha tenido hartos como críticas, pero es un proceso de nueva constitución que se gestó de forma paritaria entre hombres y mujeres con perspectiva de género, fue inclusiva, fue participativa, porque llamaron a todas las instituciones de la sociedad civil que tenían algo que decir, que se pudieran acercar y lo presentaran, y hubo una especie como de tiempo para poder hacerlo. Y bueno, creo que la institucionalidad en Chile por lo menos está cambiando, o tiene muchas posibilidades de cambiar, y me parece muy interesante, digamos, cómo podemos conectarnos, digamos, como sitio y trabajar en conjunto eventualmente a nivel global con alguna iniciativa, poder dar cuenta de nuestras particularidades, el problema de cómo se vive en cada lugar, en cada espacio, y bueno, visibilizarlo. Y claro, cuando hablo de visibilizarlo también está esta idea de la empatía, ¿no? Nosotros no solamente visibilizamos como una acción de difusión, sino tratamos de buscar una conexión. Y creo que eso es lo importante, en la medida de que confrontemos el problema, pero sabemos que este problema va a tener también consecuencias para las nuevas generaciones, y que todos como comunidad deberíamos enfrentarlo. Creo que hay muchas más perspectivas de posibles cambios.
Yes, I love that people are throwing in some links. We've got people doing archival research with collections. We've got folks interested in sharing artists' work. Jen, there was a question about whether you've been able to see increases in hope as part of your work.
Yeah, we definitely have. Thank you, Laura, for that question. I think that for us, bringing to what we've seen at all of the youth climate summits that we've done across states and around the world, bringing together young people to share their own stories, to connect with other young people about what's happening in the climate crisis, and to find ways to create solutions in their own communities by following their own passions, by working on civic engagement, by really connecting has really created a lot of hope. But young people right now are in a pretty serious mental, I think I don't want to speak for everyone here, but there's mental health crisis around the climate emergency and around in general, like so much of it with the pandemic and sort of overlying all these other incredibly important societal issues that are so intersectional, that finding ways to support young people, to help to create space for young people, to be an advocate for young people. That's so deeply ingrained in the work that we do, and really, you know, can support hope and finding those shared stories, like hearing stories of people and finding those connections to ourselves, I think is one of the most important things we can do right now to take care of our own personal health, but also to help support others in this work.
It's interesting that right, you talked about art and culture in there. Danielle, when you all present the information, you didn't just collect stories, you all took photographs that are really beautiful and intentional photographs as well. So I wondered what will kind of, if you think about the art, right, and there's the play that's part of it, how do you think about art playing a role in your project as well?
Sí, mira, comentarte que el proyecto fue bastante modesto en un inicio. Yo creo que todos estos productos se fueron sumando en la medida que se fueron sumando muchas disposición. Fue con muy pocos recursos, pero creo que se logró bastante. Mucho de este trabajo se logró con estudiantes en práctica de universidades, donde pudimos combinar cientistas políticos con antropólogos. Yo soy antropólogo, geógrafo, digamos, que estaban trabajando también estas temáticas. Y teníamos una práctica que nosotros como sitio de memoria nunca habíamos tenido de estudiantes de teatro. Y creo que el teatro cumple un papel fundamental como para poder sensibilizar y abrir una discusión de una forma tal que pueda abrir un diálogo intergeneracional, que te apela también a la motilidad, pero tiene una acción política, de alguna u otra forma. Creo que fue una muy buena experiencia porque, como te digo, viendo la obra podía hablar una persona que participaba como dentro de una comunidad étnica, como una persona que tenía algún papel a lo mejor en las políticas públicas o tenía algún cargo a nivel del gobierno local. Creo que da oportunidades de poder charlar, hablar, discutir, reflexionar acerca de estos temas. Nosotros escribimos un artículo acerca de la experiencia de etnoteatro. Nosotros no teníamos como una relación con esta idea de etnoteatro, de hacer etnografía para poder hacer representaciones que eventualmente a través de esta forma performática pudieran movilizar a las personas. Lo voy a compartir también en el chat, dejé un enlace donde hay algunas de las publicaciones que hemos realizado en relación al trabajo con comunidades, bueno, con archivos también, que es una de las cosas que trabajamos en Villa Grimaldi, pero hay un artículo ahí que habla acerca de la experiencia del etnoteatro como una herramienta interesante para poder llevar a cabo esta iniciativa. Voy a compartir también el documento por si eventualmente quieren consultarlo.
Great. Thank you. And Sarah sharing that there's right to this conversation about mental health crises, right? The new psychological association report that's coming out, and an advocacy opportunity. That's awesome. So yeah, and thank you all for the other pieces that are being added in here. So clearly, this is an ongoing conversation that we are not going to finish today. And I know folks are having to start to run, so thank you all for spending time with us. Camilla, our wonderful Camilla, who is part of our communications team, is going to drop a link to an evaluation that always helps us understand better what we are doing and how we can make that happen. She also was mentioning, yes, next conversation, we're going to talk about labor, which has already come up a couple of times in here, right? These things are not disconnected from each other. And that's just one of the things I want to thank all of our speakers for today, is the ease with which you move between talking about past history and politics and economy and cultural damage and environmental damage and individuals and systems and structures. Just your literacy to be able to move between all of those things is really exemplary of us not getting stuck or siloed in only one understanding of this. So thank you for modeling that for us. And also thank you for sharing so much of your hard-won knowledge and perspective these days. I hope many folks get a chance to connect with each of you, because there is so much more. We are just skimming the surface. And I think maybe one last thought for me, as people are thinking about mental health and what we are also trying to take on with the planet. Right, is one thing that a member has said in the past, right, is that coping is something that we do alone, and healing is something that we do together. And that every time we think about bravery, every time we think about hope, every time we think about change, that is all things that come out of what we do with other people, with other sites, with the kinds of organizations and relationships that each of our speakers has put together. And so thank you for the work you have done, to everybody here. And I hope we get to build some networks that keep us all moving forward. I'll hang around for another moment and chat if anybody wants to stay. Otherwise, thank you all so much for being here. Thanks to Rob, who made translation possible today, Rob Garcia, building bridges for us. We appreciate you always, Rob. And we'll see everybody hopefully soon.
Thank you so much
Bye
for
all.
having us.